the basic reason that we're here today is because we care about the Aina. And this is a time of great uncertainty. But we're reminded that we're dependent on nature for our existence, and we're not separate. Maui has seen decades of rampant development and population growth, and our economy has become more and more dominated by tourism and the sale of our Aina to outside investors. Now, suddenly, with the pandemic that's going on, all of that is at risk. And what are we left with? We're left with each other and the Aina, that which feeds us. So we're more aware than ever of our dependence on food and other goods that are shipped here from outside Hawaii. This is a wake-up call, and it's critical that we all engage in decisions that are to be made over the next weeks and months so that unwise decisions are not made in the name of expedience or under the guise of emergency. So today we're going to give you some of the tools to do that, and we want to help you to channel your passion for the Aina effectively. If we are successful, the silver lining from this wake-up call will be that we become more self-sufficient on this island and we reduce our vulnerability. We have a really good set of panelists today, and I'm going to show you the agenda in just a moment. As we go forward today, I'm asking that the knowledge that we share and the knowledge that we gain today and the passion that we bring to protect the Aina will each be guided by wisdom. So mahalo for attending. So I'm just going to go over this briefly so people can understand what we're up to today. This very awkward introduction is by me. So talked about why we're here today, and this is our brief overview of the day. Our 10:15 to 10:45, I'm going to be talking about state and county government structure and some of the opportunities for engagement, the EIS law, and I'm going to talk about how your vote helps determine who the decision makers are. So who gets to be on the planning commission, et cetera, et cetera. Then between each session, we're going to do a 15-minute break. So from 10:45 to 11 will be off for our first break. And then at 11 o'clock, we're going to be going into a session called Making a Difference at the Hawaii State Legislature. And we have definitely some really good panelists on this session. Gary Hooser is with HAPA, Hawaii Alliance for Progressive Action. Tina Wildberger is a state legislator for South Maui and former Maui Tomorrow board member, actually. And Simon Russell is going to help us with his experience. He's used to be the legislative coordinator, I believe, for the Farmers Union. And he's got a lot of important tips on that. So after our next break, then we're going to go into citizen engagement at the county level. So our illustrious panelists for that session will be Kelly King, who's currently council person for South Maui, Mike Molina, council person for Paia Haiku, and Clara Pana, who is very effective on a citizen level interacting with the county council. So then after the next break, we're going to be going into the Planning Commission session at 2 o'clock. Former Planning Commissioner Dick Mayer. We've got Thorin Abbott from Coastal Planning Consultants and a former shoreline planner. And Lucianne Dene, who's on with us right now. And Justin Kikivi, who is another citizen activist who's been very effective at Planning Commission sessions. After our next break, we're going to be talking about how to write testimony. And for those of you who have looked at the links that we sent out yesterday, there's some instructions on how to register for an account at the legislature, some written sample testimony, and we'll have time for questions and answers. And then we'll go into closing remarks, and there'll be lots of time for questions during the day. It's going to be a long day. If you wish, you can drop out and come back if you're particularly interested in a session. So anyway, that's what's up for today. I just want to talk a little bit about Maui Tomorrow's mission, and I summed it up in these 3 bullet points. So protecting natural areas and open space, fostering ecologically sound development, and preserving the opportunity for a rural lifestyle. I mention that because we use this as a guide to determine what we are going to take on as an organization. As you can imagine, there are many, many things that we could get involved in, but I encourage anyone to not try to be involved in everything. If you want to be effective at anything, you can't be involved in everything. On the other hand, there are a lot of organizations and people out there right now who we cooperate with, and together we can get it all done. So that said, I wanted to talk about the different interests of the participants. So with your registration, we ask you to fill out a few questions. And then, so I've ordered it in order of interest. So as you can see, clearly, many, many people are interested in our affordable housing issues. Second is over tourism. Third is climate change. And you can see all the rest there. For those of you who are on the phone, I'll just say that next was stream flow, wetlands protection, renewable energy, shoreline access, cultural practice, and sea level rise. Now, clearly there's overlap between these. For example, over tourism is a cause of our affordable housing crisis. It's one of the causes, and the way that we bring people in here who are all interested in buying a place to live has a direct impact on our housing prices. Now, as I mentioned previously, all of a sudden we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there are some people coming trying to take advantage of these cheap deals, but going forward, we can expect that our tourism is going to be definitely dropping off, at least for several months, I believe. And so it's hard to predict how that's going to affect the affordable housing situation. If people don't have jobs, then it's going to be definitely affecting that. But I just wanted to give an idea. Now, if you are interested in a particular area that is not in Maui Tomorrow's mission, I can tell you that what tools we present for you today are still going to be useful. You'll be able to take your particular interest area and advocate for it using these tools. So we have been able to make a difference along with many other people. This is a chance, sorry, this is a picture of the Land Use Commission hearing. I believe it was in 2015 for the Oluwalu Town project. And there was a lot of public opposition. We had a lot of groups come together to oppose this project. And even though the developers had put in 10 years and a lot of money, millions of dollars into this project, we were able to get the Land Use Commission to reject their environmental impact statement by a vote of 7-2. So that was a big success. I wanted to talk a little bit about the planning and regulatory framework that we're all dealing with. And as you look at this complicated diagram, just think of it in terms of places that you can plug in. And we're going to talk about a few of those, but this is the basis for all of the laws and the land use controls that we have. And so it's better, the more you understand what's going on with the Constitution, the State Planning Act, the general plans, the different types of state land use districts, Um, and there's a key here. So everything, this color here has to do with the state. Everything that's in yellow has to do with the county. County is over here too, so that's a little off of the key. But then the shoreline issues are over here on the right. So we'll be going through some of those areas. In particular, we're not going to talk about the Land Use Commission today. That's, I would think, a pretty complicated session. But what we are going to talk about is the state legislature. We're going to talk about the county council, and then we're going to talk about the Maui Planning Commission. The state legislature influences all of the laws, the Hawaii revised statutes. So they can change the rules, basically. And there have been attempts to do that in the past. They can change the rules by which we're playing. So it's important for us to be able to engage and let those legislators know that we care about the Aina and we don't want them doing things that would undermine our ability to protect it. The same thing goes for the county council. They can change the rules that apply to, you know, how community plans are used or what's exempt from the community plans, and they have done that in the past. The Maui Planning Commission also sets its own rules, and interestingly, they're all appointed by the mayor. They're not elected. So if you want to influence who's on the Planning Commission, you need to be voting in the mayoral race. And by the same token, if you want to influence who is on the Land Use Commission, those people are all appointed by the governor. So you need to be voting in the governor's race in order to have an impact on what land gets redistricted, for example, from agriculture to urban. These decisions are made by the land use commissioners. There are lots of other examples, but I'm just trying to make a connection here between the power of your vote and our ability to protect the Aina. So I'm going to move on from there. I also want to mention something about environmental impact statements. And this could be more than a full day in itself. I've personally reviewed hundreds of these over the years, and I know that several of our panelists have also reviewed many, many environmental impact statements, and I can say that I'm still learning about what goes on. It's pretty complicated. I'm going to go over the basics. I'm going to talk about the state law, Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 343, and the main thing I'm going to talk about there is what triggers the need for an environmental impact statement. Not every project requires an environmental impact statement or even an environmental assessment. I'm not really going to go into much of the difference there, but if there's a significant impact as determined by the significance criteria and the Hawaii administrative rules, then they have to do an environmental impact statement. Otherwise, if there's no significant impact, they can get away with the more abbreviated version called the environmental assessment. It's very important if you want to be involved and know what's coming up. The projects that do have to prepare an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement are all listed in what's called the environmental notice. And that's put out by the Office of Environmental Quality Control, which happens to reside in the State Department of Health. So I'll go into that in a little more detail. This is the list. This is straight from the Hawaii Revised Statutes. The purpose of the environmental impact statement law is to establish a system of environmental review that will ensure that environmental concerns are given appropriate consideration in decision making, along with economic and technical considerations. So if you look then under applicability and requirements, there are 9 main triggers. And if a project falls into any one of these categories, then it has to go through the environmental review process. So one that's very common is the use of state or county lands or the use of state or county funds. Any use within any land classified as a conservation district or a shoreline area. Any use within any historic site that's designated on the national or state registers. Amendments to existing county general plans, and I'm not going to read that whole thing, but generally, if the amendment is to a general plan, they're trying to make it urban, and those typically require an environmental assessment at least. Interestingly, if the general plan, or on Maui we call them the Maui Island Plan or the community plan, if those are under review by the county, then it doesn't require an environmental review under the EIS law. And then there are some other ones that don't come up very often. Any helicopter facilities require environmental review under the EIS law. And then one that we've been dealing with quite a bit in West Maui is a wastewater treatment plant. Unless there's an individual wastewater system like a septic system that serves fewer than 50 single-family dwellings. So developers are coming in with 49 and getting away from having to do an environmental assessment. Waste to energy facilities, landfills, oil refineries, or power generating facilities all have to do environmental assessments. I'm going to ask Lucianne, can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can.
Did you want to offer any corrections or comments just briefly?
Well,
to you?
I just wanted to explain to people, sorry, I'm eating breakfast, but let me put my video on. I just wanted to explain to people that the whole framework, if you're in here by phone and you didn't see the chart, the whole framework of permitting things starts with our state constitution, and then there are different phases of review. One is by the State Land Use Commission, one is by counties, by either the county council or the planning commission, and then there are also special permits that come under Department of Health and so forth and other things. But each one of these review opportunities is a place where people can actually get involved and can make comments, or in some cases actually put some sort of challenge to an action. So it is important to try to understand where you could be most effective in having your voice being heard. And if you have concerns, who are the best body to hear those? So the question I get all the time is, this project is terrible. Why didn't it have to do an EIS? And as Albert said, only certain things trigger an EIS. And our laws were just recently updated. No new triggers were added. But things can be defined in a certain way that they never trigger any environmental review. And that's frustrating, but they might trigger a special management assessment. They might trigger some sort of conditional permit. So all is not lost. There's another way to be heard about your concerns.
Okay, thank you, Lucianne. And again, we're trying not to go into too much detail. You can see this is just a summary, and that's plenty of detail right there. So you can imagine how much more detail there is. And there's a lot of case law, legal case law on this that influences what these words actually mean. I'm going to go down to the next slide, which is the environmental. Well, first I'll go up here and remind you that what we're talking about is the triggers. So we talked about what puts an action project into needing an EIS. And then if they do just an environmental assessment and not a full environmental impact statement, what we do at Maui Tomorrow is we review these significance criteria that I'll talk about now. If they trigger the significance criteria, then they're required to do an environmental impact statement. So from the Hawaii Administrative Rules, from the Department of Health, Chapter 200.1, these are the environmental impact statement rules that implement the state law. And sorry, I'm adjusting my screen so I can read all this. I'm not going to read it all, I promise. But these are the reasons that a project might be required to do an environmental impact statement. And I will tell you that developers try to get this through, even though there might be, I'm just going to pick one, say number 5. If a project has a substantial adverse effect on public health, they might try to get it through on an environmental assessment anyway. And sometimes the state or county agencies, they agree and they say there is that the final environmental assessment that they put out is adequate, even though it doesn't talk about a substantial adverse effect on public health. In that case, people have the ability to file a lawsuit to challenge that in court. And although we try not to do that, that is one of the tools that we have used over the years. And we've stopped some pretty bad projects with that tool right there. So number 9 is having an effect on rare, threatened, or endangered species. Number 12 is an adverse effect on scenic vistas and view planes. So all of these, if any project triggers any one of these as a significant environmental effect, then it's required to do an environmental impact statement. And I'm going to leave it at that for today. We're running a little early for our panel on the legislature. So I think what I'm going to do is go to questions at this point. How soon can we accelerate local organic food production on Maui? That is, you know, we're not farmers. We try to work closely with the Farmers Union, as you can see by my hat here. We're not farmers, but that is something that we, Maui Tomorrow, believe is really important, and especially in this time where it's possible that we may lose, I mean, I'm not saying we're going to lose our shipping from the mainland or wherever our food comes from, but it makes it, this situation makes us think about that. Food Security Hawaii is putting together a local gardening program that's going to help people to be creating food production, and I think it's mostly going to be organic. There's another organization called the Common Ground Collective that's been going for, I think, a couple of years. And what they do is they help people to establish gardens. They help people to collect, to harvest fruits that are otherwise would just fall on the ground, and then they distribute them locally. So I'm going to defer, though, to other organizations like Food Security Hawaii, Common Ground Collective, the Hawaii Farmers Union, to answer that question about how do we accelerate local organic food production on Maui. So thank you, John. Lee Chamberlain has a couple of questions here. I'm just going to read this. Required environmental studies and permitting, item 2A on invoice costing. I'm not sure what this means. Environmental Council established an exemption list. Specifically list walkways, bikeways. Why is Department of Public Works spending $120,000 on required environmental studies to ultimately harden a surface 10 feet wide over 7/10 of a mile from an existing, on an existing railroad bed when there's an exemption? Well, that's an interesting question, Lee. I can tell you that exemptions are only valid if there is no significant or cumulative effect on the environment. So just because something is on an exemption list, and I'll talk about exemptions in just a second. This is part of the EIS law that I didn't go into, but just because something is on the exemption list doesn't mean there won't be an impact. And so if they in fact have assessed that there might be a significant or cumulative impact on the environment, then they can go ahead and elect to do environmental studies on any project. So I hope that answers your question. What I talked about previously with the environmental impact statements and the environmental assessments and all of the triggering criteria, there's also a provision for exempting certain things from having to do all that stuff. And these are things that are common and usually don't have an impact, like maybe putting an electrical substation on ag land or putting in a sign or something. So there's a whole list of county exemptions. And if we could make a note to put that up on our resources, we'll be getting that up on our website. So I hope that helps. And then the other question, Lee, is in a similar vein. So I think the answer is the same. It depends on the judgment of the agency if they think there's a significant or cumulative environmental impact. Okay. Can we go to the phone and see if anybody has questions?
Let's see if anyone. We're seeing the questions from the chat, and
Okay,
I saw a good comment from Mark Sheehan sharing Common Ground Collective and the Ohana Gardens Initiative. Yeah, we have a comment from Stephen Foreman. So triggers for an EIS. Does traffic impact trigger an EIS?
Traffic is certainly one of the impacts that can be assessed. Lucianne, do you recall offhand if that is a trigger? Definitely environmental impact.
It is under where it says cumulative social impacts or community impacts. There's a trigger that covers a broad range of things, like by approving something, would it mean that your sewage treatment plant needed to be expanded? Well, that's not a specific trigger. It's described under impacts to infrastructure. So traffic would be impacts to infrastructure, because roads are considered infrastructure. Yes, it is definitely an impact, and every environmental impact statement has sections, what they called a traffic study that evaluates traffic. Strangely enough, they all find there's no problem.
That's true. And also, I'd like to also point out that one of the things we're supposed to look at is cumulative impacts from other projects that are happening in the area. So what we're always finding, not always, but with most of the environmental documents that we review, is that the cumulative impacts and the secondary impacts are minimized. I can think of only one environmental impact statement that actually did an adequate job of reviewing that. So I see a question here from Dr. Mary Trotto. Mary asks, so the current Maui Planning Commission is appointed by the mayor. Who and how can this be changed? I believe that's in the charter. Anybody know the charter better than I do? We need a charter amendment to change that?
Yes, you would.
So that's that answer. The other way you can influence who's on the Maui Planning Commission is by electing the mayor who you believe supports your values. I see a question from Mark Sheehan. How can Maui activists have a greater impact at the legislature? So many of our issues seem slighted at the state level. I would agree that the state has a huge impact on what we're doing. And it's not easy to have a good impact at the legislature. There is an online way of providing testimony that we will be going into in the next session. But it's always better in person. There is not, unlike the county council, where they have at least the ability for Molokai residents and Lanai residents and Hana residents to testify over the phone remotely, there isn't any ability to do that. I think they're experimenting right now with that at the legislature in one of the committees, a tech committee or something like that. But it's something that we've been asking for years. And I'm hopeful that with, another silver lining from this pandemic might be that people can testify online with something like Zoom or Bluehost. So it is a challenge, an ongoing challenge. So I hope that answers your question, Mark. From Stephen Foreman, I didn't get to read all the triggers for an EIS. Oh, and you're asking about traffic impacts. Okay.
Could I follow up on Mark's question a minute about how you can be effective if you live on Maui? There are certain groups that track things that might be of interest to you. These groups are very willing to send out alerts on when bills are coming up for an important hearing. And if you sign up for their list, whether it's the Center for Food Safety, whether it's HAPA, Gary Hoozer's organization that he's involved with, the Sierra Club Capital Watch, and Hawaii's Thousand Friends. There's all kinds of groups that track important issues, and each have kind of like a Kuleana range. So if you're interested in making an impact, if you get on these mailing lists or email lists, you'll know when to send in testimony, and it can make a difference. That's how that Public Lands Development Corporation, PLDC, got overturned. It was a statewide effort triggered by email alerts. And of course, the people from Oahu showed up in person. And those of us who lived on outer islands, some of us could come for one meeting. But in general, people connected can actually have some power at the legislature.
Thank you, Lucianne. That's very true. I see that Suzanne has a question, and I'm going to press this button that says allow to talk. Suzanne, are you there? Okay, I'm not hearing anything from Suzanne.
I'm also seeing 4 in our queue, one from Lee, one from Mark, one from Carol Ann, and one from Wendy. Lee was asking about a Public Works paying Uenomori Engineering for an assessment for the Maui Greenway.
We talked about that.
Right, we answered that.
Mm-hmm.
Mark mentioned that the world's moving towards Zoom, and possibly that he thinks the county council can allow and legislature allow us to testify online, which makes sense. Carol Ann was asking or mentioning, let's see, we can meet with and become acquainted with our representatives. So they have, so when we need to have their ear, they have a real connection to us. So who are our representatives? That's probably a good comment for the chat.
I'll take the next one, Aaron.
Yep. All right, excellent.
So, thank you. Wendy K. Singh says, I would like to be part of a beautification effort. I worked with Santa Barbara Beautiful, a nonprofit that worked closely with the city to monitor and maintain public trees and plantings. They gave awards to homeowners. I just moved to Maui to be near family, and many people have junk in their front yards, etc. There is an organization on Maui called Maui Green and Beautiful. So if you want to look that up, there's a person, a couple of people that we know There's Elaine Molina and Barbara Fernandez who are in that. But if you look up Maui Green and Beautiful, that is a good way. There's also the Malama Maui Nui organization, and Gabrielle Sugar is the executive director. They pick up vehicles on the side of the road, not necessarily in the front or side yards, but that might be a good organization for you to contact as well. So thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Okay.
Also, Albert, many community associations also help on community efforts for cleanups and beautifications. Kihei Community Association, Ma'alaya Village Association, Haiku Community Association, Kula Community Association. They've all been involved in beautifying, planting trees, other sorts of projects over the years. So depending on where you live, you could get involved with your local community association as well and volunteer to be on their beautification or cleanup committee.
Yes, and I'm thinking that you are hoping that they might get involved in the Malama Hamakua efforts.
Yeah, that's one, but that's a long range effort. But there are many short range efforts. Every community association has been involved in creating beautiful places within their community.
Right, right. There's a lot of people who care about Maui and are very involved. I don't see any more questions. We're up to 36 attendees, so that's great. We're going to go to a break now, and we'll be back online at 11 o'clock with our session on how to make a difference at the Hawaii State Legislature. So please stand by. Thank you.